ahead and get started. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight, and welcome to the Anchor Center. This is called The Lounge here in the building, so thank you for coming. My name is Nisha Davis. I'm the CEO of Arizona Foundation for Women, and tonight we're talking about the Me Too movement, and have a very special guest lined up for you who will be introduced in a moment. I just want to quickly tell you, if you don't know, well, first of all, who's first time here with a She Talks? Wow, awesome. So our She Talks salons are basically a way for us to talk to the community about issues facing women here in Arizona and across the U.S. Sorry about the buzzing. And so basically we really do three things, three ways. We have this little slogan, so by the time you leave tonight, hopefully you'll remember it, and it'll be an easy way to know what we do. We say we rap to she. And so rap is we do research, a major research project every 3 to 4 years to really inform the community of how women fare here in Arizona compared to men, and then we look at Arizona compared to the rest of the U.S. and sometimes nationally. And as you could probably guess, we don't do too well in a lot of the areas around our she area, which I'll talk about in a second. And then we take that information, we advocate for women, and we make everyone aware about how our standings are. And then the last thing we do is we do philanthropy. So we give grants out to nonprofits that do work around women and children issues, more women focused, but a lot of times people tag on children with it. And so that's our wrap: research, advocacy / awareness, and philanthropy. And so we do that through grant making for the nonprofits. And then we wrap to she. As you can see in the banners back here, our three areas are safety, health, and economic empowerment, because we believe that if women have those three core essentials as a part of their life, that they can be really self-sufficient, successful, and it also benefits our entire community, financially especially. So we really want to empower women. We want to make sure she's safe, and we want to make sure she's healthy. So what do? See, just something easy and simple to remember. I can't take the credit. I didn't come up with it, but I also, Yvette's standing in the background.
She's the top artist.
She just said it one day in the meeting. She's like, I have an easy way of how I remember it. I just rap to she. Oh, that's it. That's what's going on. So I also wanted to thank our sponsors tonight. We have Southwest Airlines, who's one of our sponsors of She Talks, as well as State Farm. So I want to say thank you to them. And I have to check my notes because I never stay on script and they yell at me. So I have to make sure I'm not missing any key important things. Oh, I also want to recognize any board members here tonight. So Yvette, who is in the back. We have Cynthia and John, who you'll meet in a second. Am I missing anyone?
Maureen.
Where's Maureen? Maureen's over there. Jody. Thank you. So thanks to our board members for coming tonight and bringing friends. And I think I'm going to now turn it over to John Elison, who is our only male on our board. Yay! And John is the division chief of Maricopa County Attorney's Office. So originally he oversaw all of the cases that dealt with domestic violence, human trafficking, abuse, and now you pretty much run everything or oversee everything. And I'll let him explain that a little bit more. But he's also the chair of our program committee who really puts on these She Talks salons. So I would like to bring John up to introduce our speaker.
Thank you. Monica, why don't you come on up? Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.
Here, Monica and I were just talking here at AFW. We kind of said, look, if you can't get behind safety, health, and economic empowerment for women, Monica said you must be Satan or have no feeling. So I'm kind of joking, but it really, these are things that are easy to get behind, and we're glad you guys are here and you want to be informed and learn about this. Monica and I have sort of danced in the same circles for almost 18 years.
Just a couple of years.
Just a couple of years, that's right. But she's someone I've come to respect from afar, and I want to just tell you guys just a little bit about her. She's had a diverse and successful legal career, which has led her to focus really a practice of mediation. She's also made this shift from zealously advocating for her clients to compassionately helping others resolve their disputes. During her career, she started off right at the county attorney's office. So there she made a good reputation for her. So, and she did good work there. but she's also been a pro tem judge with the Maricopa County Superior Court. She's an adjunct law professor. She's a legal commentator and analyst and radio host. I'll tell you more about that. But she has her own program on Sundays on KCAR. From time to time, I hear you driving home from work. I think with Gatos and
Mac and Gatos.
Mac and Gatos. Yeah. So I hear they'll call you up and ask you questions.
Yeah, I have to slap them around a little bit.
But she, I mentioned she's an adjunct law professor. That's at the Summit School of Law, and she teaches several classes, including mediation. But she's also involved in her legal and civic community. She's a past president and current board member of the Scottsdale Bar Association. She's a current member of Church's Board of Trustees, past member of the Thurgood Marshall in a court, and past member of the City of Scottsdale Board of Adjustments.
That's before I had kids, right?
Now, and she said this to me, the most important thing are her 2 kiddos. So she's got 2 kids, and she does just great work raising them. But let me tell you about her radio program. She's a co-host of The Agenda on KTR News and Arizona sports legal expert. I'm impressed.
I love sports and law.
You can find her blog, which you guys can all look up while she's up here talking, but it's hashtag Legally Speaking blog, containing informative posts and videos on KTAR. In addition, she has been or will be featured on various programs on the Investigation, Discovery Channel, and Oxygen Networks.
I didn't get to meet Oprah or anything like that.
Not yet.
Not yet.
But we're excited for Monica to be here and to talk to us. And Monica, we've heard so much about the Me Too movement, and we really just want to hear from you. I know today you're going to talk about sexual harassment, what it is, what it isn't. And guys, Monica's going to speak for a while. If you have any questions, that we just have to hold your questions, and at the end we'll open it up and we'll let you guys ask questions. So let's give her a round of applause.
So I've been teaching a lot lately at one of the law schools downtown. So if I turn around and start asking questions, waiting for an answer, sorry, it's the habit of being a professor and waiting for you to answer. So I do have my notes here just because there's so much that's important about the Me Too movement and sexual harassment in the workplace and discrimination that I want to make sure that I touch on several things. I won't go in depth into any one particular thing because, again, there's so much. I have a little outline for you just so you know where I'm going. It's always a little bit more enjoyable when you know when I'm going to stop talking, right? So you can kind of keep up. And I was talking to my colleagues, and I said, hey, I'm going to be talking tonight about the Me Too movement and sexual harassment, and I would love to know some of your thoughts to see if there's something that I'm not aware of, because of course there's tons of stuff I'm not aware of, and just get a feel. And one of my colleagues, she's in her 30s, she runs a nonprofit, she works with women in the prison system, and she's very passionate and very vocal about things, and she told me something that I wasn't aware of, and I really want to start this discussion off with this point because it just really made me take a step back and go, wow, I hadn't even thought about that. She said the Me Too movement actually started back in 2006 that a lot of people aren't aware of, and I want to make sure I say her name right. Tarana Burke. She is a black woman who is also a survivor of sexual assault. And she started the Me Too movement back on MySpace. Anybody have a MySpace page? Remember that? It was before Facebook, right? She started it way back when because she would get stories of young women or maybe even older women talking about sexual harassment and sexual assault. And she didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to talk to them to make them feel better. So after one particular moving moment, she realized that she wished she could have just said to the young woman, me too. Just to let her know that she wasn't the only one that was experiencing this. Now, most of us, we had never heard of that, right? Not until recently, very recently, I think at the beginning of the fall, right? And we heard of it because we had Hollywood. We had Harvey Weinstein. We had others in Hollywood coming out and saying, this is not acceptable. This is not appropriate. and hashtag #MeToo popped up with Alyssa Milano. I love her. I used to watch Charmed. I watched Who's the Boss. I mean, I loved this girl. So she caught my attention, of course. And then Ashley Judd, as you know, she was just here last month. She was part of it and is part of it, along with the Time's Up movement. And we are all very familiar with the, as my colleague put it, the white, rich, privileged woman. Because they're the ones that came out. And she used the term that they co-opted the movement. So I started looking at a little bit of history about that with Tarana Burke. And by the way, she was named as Time's Person of the Year for 2017, along with several other women that had come out and talked about this. If you haven't seen that article, I remember having it in my house and reading through it and being very moved by it. I recommend maybe hit up Bookman's or go online and read those stories. They're quite moving and informative. Alyssa Milano, when she started using that hashtag, she got in touch with Tarana Burke and she said, hey, I had no idea. I just wanted to reach out and be on the same page. And Miss Burke said, you know what, I'll take it. I'll take it. So instead of maybe stepping back and causing a problem and saying, no, don't do this, this is for this is mine, she was very welcoming and said, great, come on, let's do it together. And that's something that I don't think the majority of America knows about. They know of it because of the superstars, the celebrities, the white, rich, privileged women. And when she was explaining this to me, there was a little bit of edge in her voice. And I think it's because of her passion for helping the women that are in the prison system and that are survivors of abuse. And that abuse often led them to commit the crimes that they're in prison for. And I started thinking about that and I said, well, wait a minute. I'm not going to judge or fault those white, rich, privileged women who came out and said something, because you know what they did? They started a conversation that maybe had been around for a little bit, but it was in corners. It was in the back alleys. It was in the lower economic areas. It wasn't out in the open. And there were so many more victims out there that they were able to use their platform and they're doing something good. So I think that we need to be familiar with Me Too and what's happening, but also recognize where it came from. And also recognize those women who are not able to speak, who are not able to get their stories out there. Those are the women that are struggling. Maybe they're in prison, like I mentioned. Maybe they're single mothers and they're just trying to work 3 jobs to take care of their children. What about the service industry workers? What about the field migrants? How about the ladies that work in the hotels and the motels? People like that don't have that voice, don't have that power. So when you think about Me Too and you hear these stories of the women who are able to come out and talk, remember the other ones that cannot. And I think that this group is very familiar with that and is aware of that because of the rap to she, right? We're familiar with those issues. And when you're having conversations with women and family members and men and colleagues at work, remind them of how it started and that it just didn't start with Hollywood. So that's a little bit about the history that I think is so important. And I can also tell my colleague that she was here with me because she'll be very happy that she got that information out, or that I was able to get that information out. Moving on, you're all probably fairly familiar with what sexual harassment in the workplace is, sexual discrimination. How many here work? Right? How many here, if you don't work now, you have worked sometime in your life? Right? How many here work with men? How many here work with women? Of course. And I want you to know that this conversation that we're having it's going to focus on men and women because that's what most of us are familiar with. But when I say that, understand that this conversation can deal with women to women, women to men. Remember that movie, Horrible Bosses? Right? Jennifer Aniston. Hilarious movie. If you have not seen that, you need to get it. It's probably on Netflix by now, but just a hilarious movie. Jennifer Aniston plays the horrible boss that is constantly sexually harassing and assaulting her male employee. So it's an extreme example, right? But maybe it's not so extreme. So as we're talking about this, understand that it goes all ways. Okay? And also remember the subset that people don't talk about, the transgender women, the lesbian, gay, bi, queer, there's one, LGBTQ, I think there's one more that I'm forgetting. But they all have to deal with sexual harassment and sexual discrimination as well. And think of sexual harassment and discrimination not just as, hey babe, you want to go out, or you're looking sexy in that dress, right? It's any time that somebody discriminates or harasses you based on your sex. So, well, you're taking maternity leave, aren't you? I mean, what, 6 months? I mean, you can't possibly expect to come back to a job and have your same position, right? You know, those are comments based on your sex. That is considered sexual harassment and sexual discrimination. So not only remember the history of Me Too, but also those voices that can't speak, but also the other categories out there that are becoming more vocal, but still need our help to do that by recognizing that it's just not men and women, there's a lot more. So a little bit on the law, which you're probably familiar with. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 addresses sexual harassment and discrimination. Arizona also has our Civil Rights Act here as well, and it mirrors the Civil Rights Act federal. So they say under the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Thank you, Commission. Unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature. The conduct explicitly or implicitly affect an individual's employment, unreasonably interferes with an individual's work performance, or creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. There's a lot of really big words there. I like to boil it down to, are you uncomfortable? Is something someone's saying, doing, looking, or acting making you feel uncomfortable? And it's not just uncomfortable such as, I cannot stand that person because they're Debbie Downer, right? Or they're just always so negative. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about other things that are out there that really come from sex. And it's not just, hey babe, you look hot in that dress. Again, it is anything that has to do with being a woman or a man or the LGBTQ, okay? So if you ever have to deal with an action, the plaintiff always has a burden. They always have to go in and prove their initial case. And it's like that in a lot of different kinds of civil lawsuits. In fact, it's like that in criminal. The prosecutor has to prove a certain amount before the alternative kicks in and you're able to defend yourself or they're able to defend themselves. The law goes on to explain that there's two different kinds, and I know you've heard this before too. There's the quid pro quo, and there's the hostile work environment. The quid pro quo, let me explain this so I don't misstate it, it's this for that, right? You do this for me, I'll do that for you. You go out with me, you have an affair with me, you do this, you do that, I'll give you a promotion. Or maybe it's they offer something to you and you don't take it, and then they turn around and punish you for it. They don't give you that promotion. They don't give you that project. They don't allow you to work with somebody. They don't allow you to go on that work trip. Something like that. I remember there was one firm that I had heard about. My friend worked there. I didn't. And they would only allow men to go on work trips. And I would like to believe it's because those men were the most qualified to go, because, that's the optimistic view, right? But it was really because they didn't want men and women to be out of town together, because they were concerned that there would be some funny business going on, which I found to be very upsetting, because if you're professional, you shouldn't have to worry about that. But that may be something that you've seen happen that could fall into one of these categories. So again, sexual harassment and discrimination, it's not always the typical guy grabbing a woman or trying to force her to go out with him. There's all different kinds that you need to be aware of. So for example, quid pro quo harassment takes place when an employer tells an employee their employment is dependent upon sexual favors. Another example of this type of harassment, an employer demotes an employee for rejecting something. We've seen a lot of that in movies or on TV shows. Those are the typical examples. But again, just be mindful where you work and maybe colleagues and listening to your friends talk. If you hear something that pops up that they're uncomfortable, maybe you could help educate them on, hey, you know what? That's not okay. You can do something about that. Sometimes just being there to listen and to give them little suggestions, then they understand the possibilities. And that can help them, even if they don't go into litigation or file a complaint with the EEOC. Because, by the way, I don't encourage litigation. Not unless you absolutely have to. I always, obviously, push mediation. Imagine that. But also the hostile work environment. Now listen to this one. This is a little bit different. This occurs when an employee claims that they are a victim of pervasive, severe harassment. Example, coworker makes sexual jokes or sexual remarks. Now listen to that word, pervasive, severe. Okay, we're not talking about looking pretty good in those pants. Brand new? They look great on you. You should get a couple pairs of that. Right? We're not talking about that. We are talking about severe, pervasive. It happens a lot. There's more than one time. There's a pattern or a series of it. Maybe every day I come up to him and say, looking pretty good in those pants. Nice. Where do you go shopping? You know, every day. But I'm looking at him with that look like, right? And there's a pattern, right? That can make him feel very uncomfortable. And, you know, let me peel back the curtain a little bit here, you know, peel off layers of the onion. I have a tendency of touching people on the arm, right? So if John was over here and we were talking, we were having a conversation, I might touch him on the arm and go, oh my gosh, that's so funny, or that's awesome, thank you so much for letting me be here tonight. And I didn't used to think anything of it. It was just me being me, right? Like I might come up to Wonder Lady here and go, oh my gosh, these earrings are so pretty, without even realizing it. But when more of this started coming to light, I realized, oh my gosh, I wonder if I'm offending people or making them feel uncomfortable, whether it's women or whether it's men. And so that's something that I've had to think about. My husband is a consultant. He's a personal coach, and he's a keynote speaker, travels around the country. And I had to sit him down and have a conversation because he's a very loving person, and he likes to help people. He loves helping them emotionally and just, you know, being there for him. He's that guy that wants to be your best friend, right? He cares too much about everybody, I would say. He carries their monkeys on his back. But I had to talk to him about, hey, when you're at a keynote and people come up to you and they're very thankful, they want to talk to you, they've really enjoyed what you have to say, and they want a picture, because you know everybody wants pictures, right? The selfies and social media. I said to him, don't touch anybody. And he said, what are you talking about? That's what I do, right? And I understand that. And I said, you can't. You as a man, you have to be really careful. No putting your arms around people, because just because they want a picture doesn't mean that that's okay, right? They might touch you. That's okay, cool. Don't worry about it. Really, I don't care, right? But just, you need to be mindful of that. Now, when you're in the workplace or anywhere else, maybe the Christmas party, maybe the bowling night out, or maybe it's just happy hour after work, you know, you don't have to allow people to do that to you. And I think that we need to let people know that also that's not okay. Now, some of you might be going, seriously, come on. I mean, really, this is just life, right? Come on, let's use common sense. If somebody's taking a group picture and they put their arms around people, that's okay, isn't it? Because that's where I was a year or so ago, thinking, that's all right. It's not always okay. So you just have to be mindful of those little things, because things like that could be systematic. They could be severe to a person. They could be patterns of harassment. So just be mindful of that and let other people know that if you're hearing this, that, okay, that might be a problem if it's making you feel uncomfortable. Now, I remember when I was at the radio station, they made me go through this is funny, they made their legal analyst go through the sexual discrimination and harassment video, right? So we always, the HR lady and I, Connie, we'd always joke about it because I knew all that stuff in there, right? But I still had to go do it. And it was interesting to see the examples that are there, but it's something that has to be done all the time. And those examples happen a lot. And we just don't realize it. So you might be rolling your eyes and thinking, it's not a big deal. But it is a big deal. And many of you here know that. This standard is a reasonable person standard. It used to be, as I was going through that training, one of the things they said on the video is, it doesn't matter if you don't think it's a big deal. It matters if the other person does. And I thought about that and I'm like, well, that's not quite right. It does matter what the other person thinks, obviously, but what happens if you get that nervous Nelly? Or that person that just takes everything so seriously or is just so, get away, oh my God, no, right? It's a reasonable person standard. And the courts are coming around to that more. And they're seeing that more because what's happening is more and more people are filing lawsuits and complaints with the EEOC saying, this is sexual harassment, this is discrimination. They get fired, bam, automatically they're filing some kind of complaint that there's harassment and discrimination. So the atmosphere has changed a little bit with the reasonable person standard. Now courts and the EEOC will also look at things and go, would a reasonable person in these same or similar circumstances feel bothered, feel harassed, feel discriminated against? So that's a good thing because we want the legitimate cases to come to light and for those people to get help. But we don't want the people that are constantly crying wolf, right? So that's a little bit about the law. With the hostile work environment, usually must be severe and widespread, or if there's not a systematic pattern, if it's one time that's just really bad, that's enough, okay? That's definitely enough. Remember that it can be physical, it can be verbal, or it can be visual. So just looking at somebody a little too, right? Leering at somebody. Women, be aware of it too. Any of you have a good-looking guy? Or maybe a beautiful woman in the office, right? And you just have a tendency of going, oh. Maybe not as much as the guys do, right? But I know when I see someone like Ashley Judd or Carrie Underwood, I'm like, oh, they're so pretty, right? And I like looking at them. Well, what if that makes them feel uncomfortable? So we can do it too. Another example, what happens if Wendy and I are sitting here and we're talking about a date I had last night? Okay, forget that I'm married. Let's just say I went out on a date. And what's your name?
Jamal.
Jamal. And Jamal is working or doing whatever he's working, but he's close to us. I'm like, Wendy, oh my God, this guy last night, wow, his body is so hot. And I mean, we had a great time and we went back to his place and girlfriend, let me tell you, right? And we're talking about this. That's okay, right? Two girls talking, it's all right. Yeah. No, you have to be careful because it could offend him. Maybe it's just my voice. Maybe it's me. Maybe it's the content. Maybe he thinks that that's something that shouldn't be talked about in the workplace, or it makes him feel uncomfortable. Maybe he knows the guy I went out with. I don't know. Whatever it may be, maybe he likes me, and so now he's really uncomfortable because I'm talking about another guy. Of course he does. I'm just using an example. Not to Russia. But that is enough that could create the hostile work environment. At the radio station a lot, Arizona Sports and KTAR, we're all in the same area, and I've been in sports my whole life, and I love sports. I mean, when I say I love sports, you don't quite understand. I mean, I love sports, and I love talking about law and sports. And so the sports guys, Doug and Wolf, and Bickley and Murata, and Bernsey and Gambo, we talk all the time. We talk about all the legal stuff, but we also it's like locker room in there. And so it's not like we're talking sex or anything like that, but there might be curse words, there might be jokes, things like that. Those kinds of things might offend other people in the office. So you have to be aware of that. That can also create the hostile work environment. Remember, when it comes to sexual harassment and discrimination, it's not just about the sexy part. It is about saying things about somebody based on their gender. Okay? Two men talking, and let's say one man is he's gay and the other man's not, and the man's saying, dude, why don't you go work out, or why don't you get into sports? I mean, don't gay people do that? You know, something like that. It's the same kind of thing. So anything that's connected to sex or gender can be considered sexual harassment or discrimination. And the subsets of sexual harassment, like I had mentioned earlier, asking employment candidates if they are married or planning on having children. Real life example, I was young and I had just gotten hired at Buse Gilbert, a law firm here. Primarily, the two main partners are Mormon, and my mentor was Mormon as well. And I remember we were talking about marriage and kids, not during my interview, it was after I was already hired. And my mentor was interviewing some other young people, and I said, oh my gosh, I wonder if they have kids, because I loved kids even before I had them. And so I was just thinking, you know, hey, you know, that's great. You know, what are your goals? What kind of kids do you want to have? Or how many kids? You know, things like that. And my mentor looked at me and he's like, you can't ask that. Because we were taking them out to lunch. And he said, you can't. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I had no idea. I was even a lawyer, but I had no idea. Well, those kinds of questions are considered gender discrimination, because then what if they didn't hire that person? And they could turn around and point, well, she asked me if I was going to have kids. Right? So that's something that has nothing to do with sex, but has everything to do with sex. Right? So those are other examples that I think are interesting that people don't quite realize. And then claiming that a person is not fulfilling certain gender roles. Example, women needing to be more feminine. You might see this in a sales business where they want the women to, when they go out to potential clients, they want them to wear the low-cut shirts, or want them to flirt, or be fill in the blanks, right? So that's another form that people sometimes don't always realize. And then other women embrace it. Same thing with men. You can have a really good-looking guy, and the boss is saying, hey, make sure you wear those pants, right, when you go to that client. So that's a little bit about the law. If employers, if anybody in here is an employer, HR department, you probably know about this. It's best to have policies, to have the training videos, to have people sign on saying they understand, they know not to do this. React very quickly if someone brings up a complaint. That's so very important. That can help a corporation, even if you've got a small business, be able to fight some kind of lawsuit because you acted right away. You tried very hard to get to the root of the problem, to figure out what was going on, to take this complaint seriously, do your investigation. You want to make sure that you show them that you're taking them seriously. If you don't, that can just really cause a world of hurt. Not only that, but you might have some kind of media nightmare if the media gets a hold of that information and uses you as an example, like 3 on your side or 5 or something like that. So if you're an employer, there's a lot of things that you should know about and you should do to protect your employees and, quite frankly, to protect yourself. So you might want to look into that. I have some more ideas, but I can always point you in directions if you need some of that. Something else that's interesting is who is liable. If you're working and you file a complaint with your HR person and it has to go further and it ends up being a lawsuit because you've gone through the EEOC, you have 300 days to file a complaint with the EEOC. You have 180 days, I think it is, to file something here with the AG's office. But what happens if you go to a lawsuit and who are you supposed to sue? Do you sue the person that was sexually harassing you, or do you sue the employer? Any thoughts? Yeah. Any attorney worth their salt is going to tell you, sue them all. All of them. I want the board. I want the bosses. I want the managers. I want everybody that's in a cubicle within hearing range of you, right? But the reality is it's usually the employers that get in trouble and have to pay the big bucks. Now, you can sue the individual person for maybe assault if they come over and they're like, "Woo," right? Or they touch you or something. That's an assault. Okay, you can sue somebody for that. You might be able to call the police, and maybe John will be there to help you out, but I doubt it. Not unless it gets really bad, obviously, and then of course the police are going to be called, and of course John will be on your side. But just something to think of, that's usually the employers on the line. Okay, and maybe the employers have to pay, but heads are going to roll. So if you're in HR or if you're a manager and you didn't pay attention to this, you didn't do something right, you could find yourself unemployed. So just be mindful of that.
So then can the employer let that employee go?
Yes, Arizona.
Or the whole thing, like we're done, I'm done.
Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, can the employer turn around and then fire the person who allegedly committed the sexual assault or the discrimination? And yes, they absolutely can. At least here in Arizona, I like to call it, we're a right to fire state, right? Nobody has the right to work here, okay? You can be fired for anything. Of course, if you have a contract, guess what? You can still be fired, right? You can still be let go. There just might be some ramifications that they have to pay for. You might have tenure, but if you're violating some code of conduct, you can get fired, right? So you can absolutely let someone go. Sometimes you might want to consult a lawyer to make sure that you have a good reason to let them go, or that you word it properly so that you don't make the mistake, because a lot of people will make that mistake. But it's a right to fire state. So you can get rid of that person, and quite honestly, if I was your attorney, I'd say yes. If there's enough facts behind it backing that up, then yeah, you probably should let that person go, because it's just going to be a problem. Good question. Great question. Let's see. Okay, so let's say that you or someone you know believes that they are a victim of sexual harassment or discrimination. Remember, this can be a woman, it can be a man, and it can be in any category. Straight, LGBTQ, trans is in there. It can be anything. And it can be based on anything linked to gender. Okay, so what do? Like I said, I'm the last person that would push to litigation, but sometimes it's necessary. I hope that it's not, because the amount of emotion and time and money it takes is just phenomenal. Even if you are completely 100% right, the toll that it takes on you and your family is astronomical. I can't even explain it to you until you've gone through it. It's just really, really tough. So one of the things you do, you go to your employer, you make a complaint. That's the first place you start. I don't always recommend going to the person that's done it. I think maybe you need to go to your employer. If it's that bad, that needs to happen. If that doesn't work, you can file a complaint with the EEOC. Like I mentioned, it's about, I believe, 300 days you have to file that complaint from when it happened. What I don't recommend is you let it go on for 7, 8, 9, 10 years and then decide to file. You can, of course, but if you end up having to have any kind of lawsuit, that's going to hurt your damages. 180 days, I think, with the Attorney General. So you can file a complaint. You have to file with the EEOC, or you could lose the right to file a lawsuit. So there is some legal stuff there that you have to be aware of. You can go to community legal services. And the women that we help, if they've suffered, oftentimes you can look to legal aid services here in Arizona that will give pro bono help and will help them. There's community legal services, there's Legal Aid of Arizona, and there's other organizations as well that will help them and you. Spend a little bit of time with the attorney. If you have the means to be able to do that, pay them for an hour of their time and talk to them and see what the possibilities are. Something else you could try before that is maybe talk to your girlfriends or your good guy friends. Talk about it. Sometimes just talking about things empowers you, right? And makes you understand, you know what, I'm not the only one this happens to. How did you handle it? What do you think I could do? And they can give you some really valuable information, right? You could talk to your significant other, right? So if I were to talk to my husband about it, I'd have to be careful, right? Because what if he gets really mad and causes a problem? or my dad, whew, right? But be mindful of who you're talking to. That can be so powerful and so helpful. Another avenue is, what about a religious organization? What about your pastor, your priest, your counselor, your rabbi, your bishop, anybody? That's part of what they do. They counsel their people. They talk to their people and help them through difficult situations. You can also go to a mediator. Right? Mediators can help as well. But that's a little tricky because that's when you're dealing with just the other person. Chances are you won't go to mediation until you file that EEOC complaint or until a lawsuit happens. Sometimes some of the bigger companies, they have in-house mediators or they have contracts with people who will come in and help you. So the reason why I'm telling you all of this is there is help everywhere around. And obviously everybody here is very strong and intelligent and probably not too quiet if something happens to them. They know where to go. But this is also information I hope you walk out of here and share with others and maybe just kind of relay it to others so then they can relay it to somebody else and the word gets out there that can help those individuals that are suffering in the Me Too movement.
I know you said the questions for the end, but one thing, I actually went to a therapist, which was covered by my health care.
Yes.
And the therapist helped me unpack what had happened and develop the courage to address it.
Absolutely. A counselor, a therapist, maybe even a doctor. Maybe you have a great relationship with your doctor. It's covered under your health insurance since we all have to have health insurance now, right? But again, for those women and those individuals out there that don't have that, there's like Catholic Charities, I believe, has a counseling program that you can call up and they'll help. And some of the other Catholic churches out there have the same type of thing. And I'm sure there's others with other denominations as well. So, and you can get damages if you have to go to lawsuit. The last thing I want to touch on is we all know that sexual harassment and discrimination in the workplace, hostile work environment, it's all very serious because it affects your life. It affects your mood, your attitude, your work, your family, your relationships with people. If you have to file a complaint, or if you're thinking about that road, or if you have to quit, or if there's something that happens, I want you to stop and think if that's where you want to go. In other words, don't make a knee-jerk reaction because this is so serious that it can have very serious ramifications for you. If you decide to file that complaint, it's going to be a lot of emotion, a lot of money, a lot of time. Not only that, but chances are, and I'll say this and then I'll explain, you might be ruining the other person's life because they might be fired from their favorite job ever. They might be, if you have to sue them, they might lose everything, right? And when I say that, I don't mean have sympathy for someone who has done a terrible thing. I mean, some people forgive and they have sympathy. I'm not very good at forgiving. Sorry, I'm not. But think about the seriousness of making a complaint or an allegation. Remember the legal standards because that's what you're going to be up against. When you're talking to somebody and counseling women and friends and other individuals about the possibilities, make sure they understand that it has some serious repercussions. The women in Hollywood, they were able to do that. Most of them, when we heard that they came out with this, they were established. They have money. They have an incredible support system. They were able to do it. The majority of us are nowhere close to that, right? And clearly Harvey Weinstein deserved to have that almost everything taken away. From what we've heard, of course. But maybe that other person, do you really want to destroy them as well? And I don't say that to judge, I just say that for you to think about and to have that discussion with people. What if they have, a family? What if they have little kids or something like that? So there's just more to it. We should be selfish for the victims, but maybe there's something else that we need to think about in there that Hollywood hasn't really shown us yet, because it's been kind of like the mob mentality right now, which I'm not saying is wrong. Like I said, I'm grateful to Hollywood because they're bringing that to light. And not only with women, but with men as well. And that's very important. Lastly, I wanted to say, remember Tarana Burke. Remember Miss Burke and what she started with. And all the women and the victims that don't have a voice, and how you can each help them further the message and help them find their voice, or maybe just help guide them to a little bit of peace and understanding. Remember those others that we didn't even know about, or we seem to forget, the women in prison that are there because they had to protect themselves from the abusers, the service industry workers, the people that work in the bars and the restaurants, the women in the hotels, and the migrant workers and the farm workers. I mean, there's so many that don't have the voice, so remember them as well. And I think about this almost every day. Teach our children, and teach even our husbands, our brothers, our uncles. They haven't had anybody teach them that some things are okay and some things aren't. Sometimes they've been lucky and they've had a very good mom or a father that's been able to, but society hasn't focused on that in the past. It's our job to do that now. I have Rhett. Yes, he was named after Rhett Butler, Gone with the Wind. And Colt. Rhett is 9, Colt is 6. And every day, my goal, not my only goal, but my main goal, is to teach them how to be gentlemen. Teach them how to treat women and others fairly and with love and understanding. Sometimes it's hard. But on my calendar that I have personalized, I say making memories and making gentlemen, because that's so important to me that my boys learn what's right and wrong. And there are so many out there that don't know, or they didn't have someone like us to teach them. So share that with those that may not have learned the lessons, so that we can stop the cycle and then they can continue to teach. So with that, thank you so much for your time. I hope I've given you at least one thing to walk out of here with that you didn't know. And are there any questions?
So Monica, what if Mona and I are co-workers? She sits next to me. Can you guys hear me in the back? No.
We'll repeat the question.
Oh, okay. So what if Mona and I are co-workers? We sit next to each other in our cubicle, and there's a gentleman that works with us, and he constantly is hitting on Mona. Mm-hmm. And Mona finally goes and makes a complaint and says, well, Misha knew about it. She saw it all the time. Is it my responsibility to do something? And if so, am I responsible? So just, I don't know if that makes sense.
So we have 2 female coworkers sit side by side every day. There's a gentleman in the, I don't know if I call him a gentleman. There's a guy in the office, right, that's always hitting on one of the females. And the female finally goes and makes a complaint, but when she makes a complaint about him, she says, hey, the girl sitting next to me, the lady sitting next to me, she's heard this all the time. She's never done anything about it, so I'm making a complaint about her. No, you're safe. I would say you're fairly safe. Unless you have done something to encourage that, to be involved in it, then I would say that you're fairly safe. Now, that doesn't mean that you won't get fired, because Arizona is a right to fire. Exactly. So I just find that highly unlikely. But that brings up a twist, because her, as the woman that is hearing this go on, guess what? Hostile work environment. If it bothers her, makes her feel uncomfortable, that she could make the complaint. And then she could go, what? I loved it, right? It was tension. I thought it was great. But it's her that's the victim. So that's something else to think about. Great question. Great question.
Jamal.
So my question is around the word reasonable. Because oftentimes if this is a right to fire, and we're also talking about power dynamics and structures. So who sets the limits of reasonable because I can think of like several microaggressions that I could do towards someone to build up to it actually being something. However, that one little event isn't going to get reported because I know the gang, right? So yeah, who sets that reasonable, and then what are the company's responsibilities to take reasonable steps to address the situation?
So reasonableness, that is a standard that's in almost everything law. Everything is the reasonable person standard. Who's the reasonable person, right? It's kind of like everybody smashed together, rolled up into a ball, and there you go. Really, the court decides what is reasonable. So Jamal, if you and I were arguing and John was the judge here and you were saying this is, to a reasonable person, these microaggressions, one after another, would be enough. And I'm arguing the opposite and saying, no, a reasonable person wouldn't think that. We have examples of reasonable people, right? Because we're both reasonable. And then the judge has to turn around and try to decide, or a jury has to decide. So really, it's whatever that person thinks or the jury thinks. Now, you might have some cases with some examples and say, hey, judge, in this case, this is what happened, and the judge found that to be unreasonable or a problem to the reasonable person.
Jamal, reasonableness is going to be very fact sensitive too. Let's say that Monica and I work in a gynecologist's office, okay, and we were talking about the female anatomy all the time. Reasonably speaking, I'm guessing in a court of law, it'd be very reasonable. If we worked at, let's just pick any Chipotle, and we were talking that way, all kinds of bells and whistles could be going off, either with us or with someone else who's hearing that going on. Because reasonableness is, again, depends on the facts and circumstances too. I just wanted to add that.
I call it the TOC, the totality of the circumstances. Who's involved, what words are being used, and what is the environment. So it's really fact specific, and that's why you have the judge making the decision or a jury making the decision. So what you might find is unreasonable, you just might be, oversensitive, right? Of course, I'm not calling you oversensitive, but,
no,
right?
I'm a man, so my ego is sensitive.
Yes.
So what is a supervisor's responsibility if the supervisor observes something and has a coaching conversation and a complaint is made to HR and nothing is done?
So what is a supervisor's responsibility when they observe something going on or someone has complained to them or they've complained to HR and nothing's been done?
Oh, yes. Oh.
I think it depends on your position. I think if you see something happening, are you in a position where you have a duty as a supervisor, as a boss, as an owner to do something about it? That's what the court's going to look at. If as a person, maybe you feel that's an ethical responsibility on you. If you are involved in the HR department and somebody comes to you and you don't do something about it, that's really where the fireworks fly. That's where a lot of the legal ramifications and consequences come down, because HR and supervisors and managers, they have the most responsibility. So I would, if I had a client that was a manager or supervisor, I would say you absolutely need to do something about it. Tell your HR department. If it doesn't happen, you need to follow up. Paper trail, email, something so that you can back yourself up as well. Because what happens if that HR person turns around and says, well, I didn't know. Who, what? Or, well, she should have done something, right? And they point the finger back at you. So it's also, I think you have to look at your own integrity and decide how far you're going to go with it.
So just to follow on, would you then escalate it if it goes, beyond HR?
Depends on the circumstances. Yeah, you also, you're going to be thinking about your own well-being too. So that's when your integrity comes into play and you decide, what should I do? And I can't answer that.
We've got a question down here.
Yeah, so I work in a consulting firm. So we deal externally with clients a lot. A lot of times in their place of business.
Right.
What type of responsibility does my firm have for clients behaving inappropriately with one of our staff members?
You know what, that's a great question. So if you work in a consultant business or maybe in a sales business, and let's say it's my company and my employees go out and meet with clients in the client's place of business, or maybe go to the happy hour or put on a lunch or something like that, and those clients are the ones that are acting inappropriately, what is my responsibility as the boss or the owner of this company? Again, always pay attention to the complaint, acknowledge it, make a trail or a record of the conversation, maybe not all the details, but that you talked about it. Do something about it. So talk to the employee and say, okay, what should we do? What are your thoughts? What's going to make you feel comfortable? And then you go from there, because remember, it's the person, the employee that you're working with. They're the ones that are going to file the complaint and cause problems. So empower them to help you figure out what to do. Because the reality is you can't do much other than firing that client. I mean, you can't go into someone else's workplace and tell them how to be. I mean, you could, but they're going to fire you then. So, but as a supervisor, just always pay attention to your employee.
Oh, a question here in the back.
So I am a legislative assistant in my senator, and so I work with a lot of people that she meets with, but then also the Senate to beneath us. And I often get, they're meant as compliments from both men and women, comments about my size, my body specifically. And with guys, it always makes me feel kind of uncomfortable because lots of times they're strangers and meeting them for the first time. But with women, it's often phrased, like almost a put down to themselves. Like they'll say, oh, you're so small, or I wish I had a figure like that, or something like that. And I don't know how to respond because it happens kind of often, and I don't know how to say, I don't know how to respond. Because I normally just smile like,
Right.
But I don't know how to appropriately say, this makes me feel uncomfortable. Stop paying so much attention to my body. I'm sorry. I don't.
So the question is we have a lady in the audience, and she works down at the Senate, and she'll have a lot of women and men come up to her and make comments about her size because she's a small lady. She's a small lady. She's a petite lady. And she doesn't know how to respond to that. Sometimes the comments will be nice and good, but sometimes they make you feel very uncomfortable. So how do you respond? Well, I'm sure the senator could tell you that when you're at the Senate or the legislature, it's not your typical employer-employee relationship, right? It is, as we've all learned from the Don Shooter incident and what that has brought to light, there's not always policies for you there. So where can you turn and how do you respond? And that's a great question. You're going to get that your entire life because you are a petite woman. And so you're going to always have those comments. And how would you respond to that? I guess you don't want to alienate anybody, right? So as not to step on toes and maybe not to turn around and harass somebody or make them feel uncomfortable. Oh, thank you. I mean, it's probably about the most innocent thing you can say. Because if you turn around and say, I really don't appreciate that, then you know what they're going to say about you then.
Yeah.
So it's a tough situation, and I wish I had a better answer. I would say if it became more pervasive and it made you feel very uncomfortable, then you need to have a conversation. But you're going to get that your whole life.
And as a guy and out there, I mean, I think that's good. I mean, it's good advice. The simple thank you, but if it ever becomes anything more, then that's when you can. And that's just kind of a good, I think. I don't want to say survival strategy, but I kind of do mean.
I have a different point of view. A thank you encourages that behavior for a second time. So just sometimes the look on your face right now with a nod.
That's a great point.
Me Oh, that didn't land well. Thank you. I was going to invite another comment.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I like
One
that.
comment in the back.
Thank you for your time. I'll try to frame this. You mentioned that you had a working relationship with some of the men at our radio station, and it's a great relationship. And I think you get a lot out of that. But some of the banter on your first day at work with those same folks might be considered as inappropriate because you don't know them that well. Could you give us some tools as to how to bridge that gap to get to, I'm not sure if it's right, I'm not sure, but to it's okay now? How do you bridge that? How do you bridge that gap?
So the question is, I had been talking about working at the radio station and enjoying relationships with a lot of the guys that are on the sports side, because there's maybe one other woman on the sports side. And how now we have this banter back and forth. We can talk. We're very at ease with each other. So that's very different than my first day when I walked in there, that I didn't have this relationship. So he asked, how do you bridge the gap? And I would think getting rapport with somebody. When you first meet somebody, ask them questions about themselves or about them. Listen to them. See what they have to say. Get to know them. Find common ground. And then as you build that rapport and that trust and that relationship, then I think the conversation can just evolve however you're comfortable with. But I think in today's time, you have to be very careful about what you say, because when other people come in that are new to the environment, I know that I actually dial myself back, and I won't act as I typically would if I was just hanging out with them talking, because there's somebody new. There's a new element to the conversation, and I don't want to make them feel uncomfortable. So I think you always have to be mindful of that, and then always know that you can't cross the line. So that would be my best advice, is the active listening, getting to know them, and gaining that rapport.
Good.
First of all, thank you for using the phrase "right to fire." It's the first time I heard anybody else use it.
See, great minds think alike.
Yeah. So I was in the situation I was in, knowing I was in a right to fire state. I felt like I was strong enough to get through it. It was going to be temporary. But I did go through my HR. It didn't get any better. They ended up siding with the other person. And by the time I realized I need a lawyer, now, I ended up getting fired. I couldn't get a lawyer to talk to me. One did say that I should go to the EEOC and they will give me my job back. Well, that's the last thing I want.
Right.
So my question is, one, how do you think being in a right to fire state really undermines any effort to get anything done in this arena for a victim? And two, where can we go to find a lawyer who will actually, because I couldn't get a lawyer, they didn't want anything to do with me. They basically said that you're not going to get enough money to pay your fees, you're not going to be able to make it through the trial. I was at that point suicidally depressed. They really didn't want anything to do with me. So, where do we go to find lawyers who are okay supporting the victim and not just after the dollars that come by supporting the company?
So the question is, here in Arizona, we're a right to fire state. So doesn't that undermine the ability to get some resolution and to basically, punish the wrongdoers when it comes to sexual harassment and discrimination in the workplace? And I think that you're absolutely right. A right to fire state absolutely undermines a lot of that, because if you say the right thing, which is what I would counsel my clients to do, they can't come back after you for firing them. So if I fire you because you are making complaints about my highest earner and it's just causing too much of a problem, and I fire you, that's really retaliation, right? And a right to fire, all I have to do is say your numbers weren't high enough, so I had to let you go. Or you were toxic to the workplace, perhaps, I had to let you go. And there's not much you can do except for turn around and sue. And then if you can prove that and that it was retaliatory action, then you could win. But the reality is, and this is where the legalities meet the realities, is that it's expensive. It is. An attorney needs to be paid because they can't work for free, although some of them do. And litigation is just expensive. So I can understand the frustrations with trying to find a lawyer. And the only answer to that is to try pro bonos organizations and then offer to pay a certain amount, perhaps, and you just have to call around for attorneys. It's, or Gloria Allred. Right? I mean, I joke a little bit just to try to get some smiles, but it's a very difficult situation. And think about the resources and the brain and the intelligence that you have. Now think about the women out there that don't have that and how difficult it is for them.
I will add that I'm from Vermont originally, and my situation happened in Vermont, which is at will employment situation. So it's not quite right to fire. But it does tend to fall in favor of the employee. And what my boss did is he basically waited me out about 9 months and then reorganized. And at that point, there was no legal recourse whatsoever. So sometimes you have to take the lesson learned and go get your best self.
One last question that
And take the message. And that's why I'm here.
Okay, guys, these are great questions. We have time for one last question. Of course, we'll stay after, but I just want everyone to remember how important these subjects are. And when it comes to safety, health, and economic empowerment, that the Arizona Foundation for Women, the organizations we support, are behind those things. Which, look, if women were safe, if they had, equal rights to health care, and if they had the same pay as men, this state would be top of all states. So that's just something that we're behind here at AFW. Monica, we're so grateful for you being here. Is there a last question anyone has? Yes.
I think this is still on the subject. This is about clothing choices. Mm-hmm. And you hear people, both men and women, say, well, if she didn't dress like that, or if he didn't have the tight pants, or whatever, comments about different clothing choices. Mm-hmm. So what is the employer's right or responsibility? You can define dress code to a certain extent, but there are certain, what can you say about that? What could an employer and or a supervisor do one way or not do?
That's a great question too, is dressing, right? Do you dress appropriately or not? If I wear tight pants, do I deserve it? Or can an employer turn around and punish me for that? And I would bring up a conversation that was happening on social media between the United States gymnastics ladies, the ones that went to the Olympics most recently. I cannot remember all the names, but I think, was it Dominique Dawes? She's the African-American young woman, right? She had put out a tweet and said that if you dress like that, basically you deserve it. I'm paraphrasing, right? And then who's the girl that's naked in Sports Illustrated?
Harassment.
Yes, Allie Reisman. She threw back, hey, look, why should we have to dress frumpy or dress a way we don't want to dress? Why can't we have that freedom? We don't deserve it. Just because we might wear tight pants doesn't mean we, it was that kind of conversation. And it was very enlightening because it actually got a lot of young girls involved in that conversation. But when it comes to employers and supervisors, you should have a dress code. And I would say use common sense with that dress code. If a woman comes in with a very low top, cleavage, showing, really tight pants, people are going to look. But you know what? It also makes other women uncomfortable too. And so as a supervisor, you need to have that conversation with them, I would say in a very non-confrontational and kind way. You know what? You are a beautiful woman. You look fantastic in that. We just might need to tone it down a little bit for our work environment. Explain and just be real with them and don't put them on the defensive immediately. I think really that's the best way. Just talk to a person as an adult and try to get them to understand the situation. If they don't, well, you know what? Arizona's a right fire state. I mean,
okay.
It is
guys,
what it is.
Let's give a round of applause to our speakers. Come on up.
I just want to thank Monica again for coming out. I know a lot of you are probably saying, we get these trainings at work, but let me tell you, every time I hear these conversations, I hear something I may not have heard. They probably said it, but it's said a different way, and it really touches me a different way, or I learned something new. And I'm very into sports as well. I'm very competitive. I don't care what it is. If I've never played the sport, I want to beat whoever I'm competing against, even if it's myself. And so every time I have to take that quiz, if I get one or two wrong. It's not fair. I just heard the presentation and I still get one or two wrong. So anyway, my point is I'm making it a joke, but the reality is we do need to hear this over and over. And because you never know who in your family, who you work with next to you is experiencing these situations and they don't know what to do and they may need help and don't know where to go. So maybe this is one of the things we could work on and having maybe that on our site on places that were attorneys. So that may be some homework for us to have that, because I've heard a couple of you say it and we haven't given you an answer.
And it's some of those women are too scared to say anything, because if it's between a paycheck and feeding their children and just having to deal with it, you know what? Every day I'm taking the paycheck and feeding my children.
Right,
so,
absolutely, and they have to endure it, which isn't right. Were you going to say?
I was just going to say that so the Arizona Coalition in Sexual and Domestic Violence has a lot of resources. One is Lay Legal. One is that we have a Sex Turned Up campaign, which talks about having difficult conversations around sex and sexuality. So it also addresses kind of, you're uncomfortable in a situation, what do you say? So someone says, you're really small, do you notice my size? Right? Just real matter of fact. And so just know that there are resources like the Arizona Coalition in Sexual and Domestic Violence, Bloom 360, just a lot of different resources out there. 365, thank you. 365 that can go from these very large, overt actions to very covert and very micro actions.
And then, John, let me ask you, always, is that just specifically human trafficking? So always is another organization, and those are attorneys that volunteer their time to help women in need. So again, I just really want to thank you all, and we do this, again, we really feel passionate about educating as many people as we can. We invite you to come to future She Talks. We have one on June 28th, and the topic is the opioid epidemic. Say that 6 times in a row. And so we have an expert coming to talk about that, and I don't know if we have a panel.
We do have a panel of experts. We've got someone from the governor's office. We've got a doctor that prescribes. We have the owner of a pain clinic. We have a former patient. And we have the elected county attorney that all kind of give different perspectives.
And we also will come to you. We have one in June as well. University of Phoenix asked us to come and do a panel on a topic for them. So we will come to you as well. And we've done them in homes. And if you have something that's going on in your world and you want to have us come, please let us know. I mean, we're here for you. Yes.
Well, first of all, Jamal, I was briefed by the center, and I had an extra folder that I shared with my assistant. But I'd like to know, what research is AFW working on now? Is there a new research project in the works?
Great question. So we are working on our 2020 release, because our last one was 2016, and we did not have this topic in our last research, and you can best believe it will be in there. So. And so I wouldn't be me if I wouldn't ask. We do ask if you can make any type of general donation. We suggest a $50 donation. It really does go back and help us, and we support a lot of programs like ACES-DB. So a lot of organizations in the community doing the work, we support them. And I hope you all received a raffle ticket, because we're going to be drawing for some prizes. I think Southwest Airlines is our prize. I'll let you do that in a minute, but I just want to make sure everybody got a ticket so we have time to do that. And then if you do make a donation, just see Ellen, who I'm going to bring up now. Ellen Lord is our donor relations and our program director. And I also want to thank Mona, who's our staff. So we're a staff of 3. And if you're not following us, please follow us on social media and sign up to receive our emails so that you know when these topics and these She Talks are happening. So, Ellen?
Thank you.
I think there's 2 little green things up there that I brought in that are actually phone holders. If you want to grab one, you can have it on your desk, and they actually hold their phone.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you talking to us. Everybody, Misha mentioned that we're doing more She Talks. We actually do have one next month, May 17th. And it's going to be...
Skip a month? Yes. You know why? It's my birthday, and so nothing matters. May 17th.
Misha will not be here for that one.
Women's healthcare.
It's on women's health. What's the latest and greatest, especially in the gynecology field, what's going on, how the field is really working to lowering teen pregnancy and how that's working, and just knowing what the latest and greatest is for women in healthcare in that area. So we're doing that May 17th. It's going to be here in this room, same time, and we'll have a couple of experts. One of the women is one of the top gynecologists, I believe, of the state.
Is that Julie?
Julie. Yes, it is Julie. So anyway, Misha did some of my spiel. Please follow us on social media if you can. Not only does that help you stay informed, but it helps us spread the word on a lot of what we're doing. So we would appreciate that. Normally, for the last 5 months, I've been talking about our awards luncheon, but that just happened March 26th, where Ashley Judd came and got an award. Dr. Jen Walter, first NFL coach, female NFL coach, and then Dr. Ken Snyder, who got we give an award to someone, a local hero. He's the dental clinic for St. Vincent de Paul, and he helps women if they have damage or injury from domestic violence. He fixes their teeth for free, fixes broken jaws, and also does training. He might see someone that he thinks would be a great dental assistant, and he's put a lot of women and men probably through the program. So our awards luncheon is going to be March 2019. We are going to have an announcement of the awardees soon. We can't do it yet. But if you're interested, we're always looking for volunteers. I had a couple people say, I want to volunteer. That's like, if you're not serious about it, it's the worst thing you can say to me, because I will figure out a way to get you involved. And someone did just leave, but she said, I want to help. I'm like, great. So we need help with the luncheon. If you're interested, I have some business cards here. And, time is money. We always need help making phone calls, help with these She Talks. We need locations to do this. We'd like to move things around, so maybe people who live in a different part of town can't get here. Maybe, we would like to be able to have one in another part of town where we can serve and educate some other people. So time is money. We always appreciate that. Of course, making a donation. We always appreciate any kind of monetary help that you can provide. And yes, I want to thank our volunteer, Alice. One of our volunteers left. She had to move. We had Alice at another event, and so she's in our web. She can't get away from us.
Once you're in, you're in.
I'm already booking her next month for this event, so if she can make it. So anyway, everybody get out the raffle tickets.
Does everybody have a raffle ticket?
So Monica, I'm going to have you pick.
So is Monica giving away phone numbers?
Yes.
Yeah, there was some up there. Okay, ready? And
read the number, please.
All right. Last four numbers are 2, 6, 6, 3.
Yay!
Oh, wait a minute. Oh, I'm Steve Harvey. My bad. 2664. No, I'm just kidding.
What she has won is a round trip Southwest Airlines ticket. Sometimes it pays to come and attend. So, right? You learn something, you might win an airline ticket. So, thank you all very much. Feel free to mingle. We still have some spots left. You should get a
That was amazing.
Yes.